Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. Don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com, as well as the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com, where you can learn to become a medical intuitive counselor, or certified energy medicine practitioner. That's www.AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com. And please do go by the Just Energy Radio webpage and sign up for our weekly newsletter, where it'll keep you informed of all the excellent programming we have coming up. And if you haven't been to the site recently, I've just loaded up almost 3 more months worth of guests, so do check it out. And you can also go and listen to all of our archives. That's www.justenergyradio.com. So let me tell you a little bit about our upcoming guests, and we're going to get started because we're going to be talking about giant UFOs and the New World Order. Anyway, CK Quarterman spent most of his life as a respected authority on business ownership and franchising, but a chance encounter on an evening walk led him to completely shift his focus to End Time Ministries. In his new book, Fallen Angels, Giant UFO Encounters and the New World Order, Quarterman delves into one of the most fascinating and strategic topics in ancient text, the record of fallen angels, giants, and UFOs. So, from www.fallenangels-ckquarterman.com, CK Quarterman. CK, that's kind of a little bit of a mouthful.
Well, we did get a little bit easier URL to remember, fallenangelstoday.com.
Well, we are going to have to go ahead and update then.
Well, both will work, but the fallenangelstoday.com is just a little easier to remember.
And say, especially with your name right behind it on the other end.
That's right. It's the mouthful.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. And I want to start here. I mean, you were a successful business guy, worked in industry. So how did you shift your focus? I mean, what's this whole thing about, going into End Time Ministries and fallen angels and giants? That's a pretty big change.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely a paradigm shift. But I had been, my early years, I'd gone to Bible college and had more or less put that on the shelf and, went into business instead. And I worked in a lot of parachurch things like homeless missions, and I worked with drug addicts and that kind of thing just because that's what I wanted to do. But through the years, I began collecting material on some of these things and some different incidents that sort of led me to do this. So I had on my computer, I had a lot of stuff that I had written. But after I had sort of semi-retired, when we'd gone up into North Carolina, and I debated on whether to put this stuff together or not. And it's, I don't want to even use the word controversial, but it's definitely out of the ordinary that most people have ever heard. And I wasn't sure I wanted to go the route of publishing something on it and becoming a spokesperson for these things. And so while I was debating this, we were up in North Carolina and in the mountains, and we had this driveway that sort of curled around down the side of the mountain, and it's about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I took my dog Star out. And not because she wanted to go particularly, but I didn't want to be woken up later for her having to go out. So I sort of pushed her out the door, which usually she was more than willing to go out. And because it was late, I grabbed one of these large flashlight lantern kinds of things and headed out there with her. And while I'm standing out there, I'm sort of looking around, and I'm, flashing the flashlight down the driveway. And when I do, I see this creature standing there by a tree. And,
like
I laugh about it because I don't have anything to compare its height with. There was no markings to really compare. It was tall. But I didn't want to be like the fisherman, and every time I told a story, it got taller and taller. But it was tall, and it had the shape and form of a man, except that it was hairy. It didn't have any clothes. But it had the face of a dog or of a wolf. Now, in modern times, a lot of people would refer to this as a Sasquatch or maybe a Bigfoot. And interestingly enough, after I had published the book, I found on a website where somebody had taken a picture driving down the road with their cell phone of something like this crossing the road just a few days later from when I actually saw this. But I knew what I was looking at was not normal, to say the least. And from, the studies that I've done, from what I believe the Bible has got to say, and ancient mythology and history, this is a hybrid. This is what we would refer to as an asylum. It's something that really doesn't belong in nature. And my thought was, if I could run into this kind of thing just in the mountains of North Carolina, then what I believe are the end of what the Bible teaches, or the end of times, are certainly right here upon us. And I knew from reading in the Gospels, and it's a very familiar passage, about in Matthew the 24th chapter, when the disciples come to Christ, they ask him, well, what's it going to be like when you return? And he goes on and he talks about wars and rumors of wars, and earthquakes and this kind of thing, which we're certainly seeing. But that's been going on for 2,000 years. But he makes this interesting statement to him. He says, when I return, it will be like the days of Noah. Then he goes on and he says they'll be married and given in marriage and this kind of thing. But the hearers 2,000 years ago, when he was speaking this, I had to ask myself, what did they hear him saying? And why would he even bring up the days of Noah? What was different and what was going on in the days of Noah that were not going on at other times? And that began a study 20 years ago that led me all the way up to where I'm at today. And then the encounter that I had just pushed me over the edge. It said, okay, you've got to go ahead and publish this. And since I have published it and, built a website and become involved as a speaker and so forth, I'm running into people all over the world that are seeing these kind of things, and I'm not alone.
Interesting.
Now,
well,
go ahead.
Let's kind of dig into this. So you mentioned, you feel like seeing this thing and having other people see this thing and some of the other things that you've observed, because I want to get into the difference between what's going on now in the days of Noah in a second. But when you say end of times, are we talking like end of times, Book of Revelation, Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. It would be called the time of Jacob's trouble, which most people think of the beginning of the Book of Revelation, and that's what I'm referring to, yes.
All right, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I'm just going to throw this out. There's a lot of talk about the Mayan calendar, and it's supposed to end December 21st, 2012. With your viewpoint to what's going on, do you feel there's any correlation to what they're saying regarding the Mayan calendar?
No, I don't particularly. I think it's sort of like the trumpet blast and the sounds that are going on across the world today. YouTube is filling up with it now. I think they're all, indications of, we're on the doorstep to when these four horsemen of the apocalypse start their ride. I don't think the Mayan calendar is of any particular significance other than it's probably just some little piece of the puzzle. I'm not looking for I'm not looking for December to be some big different than any other month.
Mhm. Okay, and I was just curious, in reading your book, you're kind of like me. You like putting puzzle pieces together, and
Yeah.
so it just seems like, okay, so if you're thinking, we're hitting the end of times, it's like, okay, but these other people are talking about the end of times up. Let's see, we're in 6 months. Ooh, that's kind of scary to say. I mean, not that I believe we're going to die or blow up or really anything's going to happen, but that's 6 months from now. Okay.
And it may be a marker of some significance as far as it may be, quite some things that happen, but I don't think from a biblical narrative it's actually important.
Got it. All right, so let's start. You talked about the days of Noah and that it was referred to that where the indicator, or one of the indicators, is that we would be behaving as they were in the times of Noah. So what was going on in the times of Noah that we're doing now?
Well, a casual reading of Matthew, the 24th chapter, and not putting yourself in the position of a Hebrew listener at that time, you just don't almost catch it. But if you were a Hebrew listener at that time, you would have been well aware of some other literature that was also circulating at that time. But also you would have been well aware that in the Jewish tradition, there was an interpretation of Genesis, the 6th chapter. Let me read it to you because it really is quite interesting. It says, "And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them." The second verse, "that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair." In fact, one historical book says that the sons of God lusted after the daughters of men, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And then it goes on the 4th verse, and it states that out of this union came giants. The word giants in the King James Version comes from a translation of the Septuagint, giantitis, meaning large, which is certainly a part of that is large, but the Hebrew word is Nephilim, and it means bully, tyrant. It means a fallen one. But what was happening here in Genesis, the 6th chapter, these sons of God, when you look at the Hebrew, were the Beni Ha-Elohim. They were angels. And there's some other literature like 1st Enoch, Book of Jubilees, Yasha, which is spelled actually with a J, and most people pronounce it as Jasha, that tell this same story and collaborate the Genesis narrative, but give a little bit more color to the Genesis narrative, in that this literature says that during this time, 200 angels decided that they were going to come down and take women as wives, and they swore to this together, and then landed on Mount Hermon, which is between Lebanon and Israel. They took these wives and all kinds of, it goes on the 4th verse, says the men of renown, referring to some of what in mythology we would call the titans, the demigods of mythology. And you find this same vein throughout all cultures of, quote, divine beings cohabitating with women and demigods being produced from that. And in the Jewish tradition, this was a known understanding of these verses. Today, in many seminaries, they water this down. They take the supernatural out of it, and they come up with 2 or 3 different interpretations which don't really fit the context of the verses and what it's saying. One simple question I always ask people, you grow up in Sunday school, for instance, and you hear about Goliath. But nobody in Sunday school ever raises their hand and says, well, how did Goliath get created? You know, how does a giant come about?
Mm-hmm.
And there's some other scriptures in Chronicles and 1st or 2nd Samuel that talks about lion-like men and creatures that had 6 toes and 6 fingers. Well, when you go back into ancient times and you start looking at this, the first thing that comes to mind are some of the megalithic structures. And, for instance, Egyptian hieroglyphics, where they show these half human, half animals. Mm-hmm. And even up into our day in culture, you know, we have vampires and werewolves. Where did these ideas in humanity originate from? Well, the truth or the origin of these mythologies are that these fallen angels, and I use the word fallen because they were certainly outside of, what would be termed a good angel, took on a human form, and they mated with women, and there's some evidence also that they mated with animals, because in Genesis it says that all flesh had corrupted its way. And if you remember, God picked the animals that actually came on the ark. The animals came themselves. Noah didn't go out and gather them up. And it even goes on to say that Noah, of course, being a righteous man, but he was perfect in his generations. So what comes out of the story here is prior to the flood, that there was so much genetic corruption because of this interbreeding. And I don't mean to give the impression here that the daughters of Adam, the daughters of men, necessarily went along with this. My take from the reading of the Hebrew is they may have had no choice. So,
well, they were gods or angels.
Right.
You know?
They,
why would you question it?
Well, they took who they chose. I mean, and I say that because I'm going to tie it into just a minute to what's going on today. We see this happened in Genesis. God destroys the world with a flood, but by the time Israel, as a nation, goes back into Canaan land, they find, again, giants in the land. The first thing that they find in Numbers, the 13th chapter, the 33rd verse, is that Nephilim are in the land. And there are whole tribes of these giants, of which, of course, Goliath was one of them, but King Org was another one. And there were a whole lot of them, but not nearly as many as there had been prior to the flood. And this is one reason that God told the Israelites, when the Israelites went in there, to destroy every man, woman, child, and it made the interesting comment, and animal, when they took over a city or an area. And that's the reason for that. So this is something that has not only gone on once in Genesis, but has gone on at least a second time.
Okay, and hold that thought.
Mm-hmm.
Let's come back to that, because I have a question. All right,
mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to start with one. Who knows where it'll go? Okay, so so you said the fallen angels, the 200 people, angel people,
mm-hmm.
had sex with the daughters of man. And so where I run into a little bit of confusion is, if these guys were angels, then how do they have sex with people?
Well, angels...
spirit being regular people.
Angels, whether they're good or bad angels, are able to take on human form. And we can assume that have all of the human bodily parts. In fact, the witness to that is in 1st Enoch, where he talks about them descending, and he talks about they had all of the male genitalia. And we know from Scripture that angels are able to take on human form and look just like people. So we can assume that whether they're good or bad angels, they're able to do this. For instance, Jacob wrestled with an angel. Angels appeared to Abraham and ate with him. Angels went into Sodom and got Lot and brought him out. And then in the New Testament makes a statement that we entertain angels unawares, meaning that there's some form at times we may have an interaction with an angel and not even realize that they were an angel. So angels, and these particular angels, we also sometimes refer to them as watchers, and that comes out of another manuscript, another place, in fact, the book of Daniel, which gives the indication that maybe these angels originally were giving some form of responsibility over watching over the earth and misappropriated their responsibilities. But it's certainly true they're able to take on human form. Now, holy angels, angels in heaven, would not, this is not something that they would do. In fact, in Matthew it talks about in heaven there's no marriage or giving in marriage, and that we're like the angels that are in heaven, but it never says that angels cannot procreate. It's just something that there's no point in heaven of this. But obviously in this case, these angels decided this was something that they were going to do.
Sounded like fun. Sorry, bad joke.
Well, if you really want an interesting description, read about it in Enoch. I won't tell you about it right now, but it's got an interesting description of it.
Okay, so we have these fallen angels, and then God selects Noah, and we have the flood. Wouldn't this have eliminated all of these guys that had come down to earth and taken on physical form?
It did. We're told in Jude and in Peter that these particular angels were locked up in the deepest, darkest part of hell called Tartarus. So they no longer inflicted humanity, no. But because the Bible tells us this is how giants or Nephilim are created, we can only assume that when Israel went into the Canaan land, this same mechanism had happened. There were other angels who had fallen. You know, we in Christianity too, and I read it in a lot of other writings, you know, there seems to be an assumption that when angels fell, they all just fell at one time. Mm-hmm. And most people will point to a scripture in the book of Revelation that talks about a third of the angels. But they never stop to realize the book of Revelation is futuristic. That's a third of the angels in the future that fall at one time. And we're never told how many angels fell originally. And my assumption is they did not all fall at the same time, but they've been falling throughout eternity.
Well, that's kind of an interesting concept, you know, where I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. You know, there are the messengers, the helpers of God, I mean, because that's their role, mm-hmm. and then they turn around and become lured by evil?
Well, I think lured would be a word, but I think, and what I talk about in the book is why God has waited so long to judge mankind or the world, and I compare it to something that we all understand. And, you know, if a child, now this is just an example, if a child grows up and sees evil, for instance, maybe he's mistreated or his mother's mistreated, when he grows up, statistically speaking, he will have a tendency to do the same thing. And evil sort of works like that, is once you've seen it, it sort of plants a seed. But you don't know for sure in what person, or we could put in what angel that seed of evil that is planted will actually sprout, or how long it will take to sprout. And that's my assumption as to why God has lingered in bringing all of this to an end, has been to wait to see who or what actually the tares will be. And from what we can see here in Genesis, these particular watchers, in bringing in some of this other historical work, says they lusted after women. There's a statement in the New Testament where the Apostle Paul talks about women praying in a church should have a head covering. And it makes a very interesting little statement after that. He says, because of the angels. Which, if you're reading this as a Jewish person, understanding what they were talking about and what their beliefs were at that time, then what he's saying is, cover your head, women, because there are angels that are looking at you who still may lust after you and who may still fall. And why is all of this important anyway in a historical context is because I believe that the same thing is going on today. We just call it something different, and it just looks different. There was a...
Okay, and let me ask one more question, and then we can move into this, but it's kind of a little bit of a leading question.
Right.
How does mankind fit into this whole thing other than being kind of the unintentional bystander in some kind of cosmic spiritual war that's going on? Or maybe you should save that for later. I'll just give that to you, and you can put it where it needs to go. Maybe I'm jumping ahead of the gun.
Well, may I just play the fifth on this and say that one of my favorite quotes of all time is Shakespeare, and he said that we are merely actors upon a stage.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I have all the answers for that, but sometimes it certainly feels that way.
Well, I mean, if the fallen angels were coming down and having relations with the people on the earth, and they are angels, I would think they, had a little bit more going on than people during Noah's time. I mean, maybe now the playing field might be a little bit more balanced, but back then it just seems like, I don't know. I mean, not to say that those people were stupid, but...
Well, from some of the historical literature, for instance, First Enoch goes on to state that the fallen angels taught mankind all kinds of knowledge which was actually forbidden. And one of the things that most of us don't realize is that the population has been assuming, this is people who work these things out, so it's over my head, but the population at the time of the flood of Noah is within close proximity, and maybe even more people on the earth at that time than there are actually today. And there seems to be indications by some of the things that have been found, which are called opeds, or out-of-place archaeological things that just don't make any sense, that the time before the flood may have had some very great technological advances, but they were all destroyed with the flood. For instance, today we can't even build a pyramid, and some of these megalithic structures look like they're cut with tools or made with tools and with a precision we can't even duplicate today.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think we have this idea that they were running around in caves and half naked with torches in their hands, but I don't think that's what the days of Noah actually looked like.
And so you think it was the people that did it and not necessarily these fallen angels that, or the giants or those type of people that created these structures? I mean, I think that the giants did it, or the offspring, or Something other than
did.
the regular mankind people.
Well, I think that the Nephilim, which are the offspring of the fallen angels in man, was certainly involved in the building of these things. I was up underneath the Temple Mount a number of years ago, and it was very obvious to me. There was a block that I think it weighed 650 tons. It was about the size of a bus. But it was very obvious it had been made to be picked up by about 6 people. So these people had to have been of superhuman height and strength to pick this thing up. So that would definitely have been Nephilim.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the pyramids and these megalithic structures were built by them. But I think they also taught mankind many things that were actually forbidden, maybe beyond what mankind was ready for at the time.
No, that I totally agree. Okay, now we can move on to where you were heading, because I do want to go there. So how are we being affected, or how have we been affected by these fallen angels, either through history or in our current time?
Well, I think in 2 ways. Fallen angels, I believe, are much more at work than any of us have any idea. I believe that they're, in both cases, they're in a spiritual realm, and I think there's some of them which are in physical form. And I think that the real powers, political powers, the powers that really control the world, are controlled either by fallen angels in human form or by spiritually by fallen angels. I think the book of Daniel brings that out, that the world powers are controlled by fallen angels. Now, the thing that is troubling to me, and when I refer to the days of Noah, and I think what Christ was referring to in Matthew, is that there's a phenomena going on today called the UFO abduction phenomenon. And I've looked at the UFO thing in a great deal, and it has all of the indications that what was going on in Genesis is going on in this UFO abduction phenomenon. Now, a lot of people just take that and they say, oh, that's just some small percentage of nuts. And they discard that altogether. There was a survey that was done recently. I saw it on Facebook. And 23 million people in the United States responded to it, saying that they had been abducted. Now, when you look at the statistics and these abductions and what's going on, here's what comes out. The great majority are women. They abducted not one time, but 2 times. Their sexual organs are manipulated the first time. On the second abduction, they sometimes are shown things, or some things are taken from them. Now, I've talked with people since I've gotten into this, which have told me they were abducted one time and miscarried something that was so horrific that the doctors would never allow them to see it. So I think behind the UFO phenomena are fallen angels and demonic beings. It has all of the characteristics, even some of the, I want to say, non-Christian but scientific researchers like Jack DeLay has stated that the things that are going on here fit the historical sort of paradigm that we would call the demonic, where people are abducted in the middle of the night out of their sleep. Something goes on, they're disturbed by it. And there's just too much of it. Some of it, of course, may perhaps sleep paralysis and may have some substantial reasons like, there's some drugs that can cause that. Apnea can sometimes cause that. But there's just too much evidence that there's monkey business going on here. And so I think that in today's time, this is the way it looks. And I do think we're going to come to a place that it's going to come out as a, what I want to say, disclosure. Now, I believe there are no aliens from other galaxies. I believe that these beings...
And so you don't think that the they're the conspiracy theory people that say the reptilians are controlling everything, and, they control the Illuminati, and the Illuminati controls the Bilderbergs, and the Trilateral Commission, and, there's that whole piece, and, it's interesting because it's kind of what you're saying sounds similar to that.
Yeah, well, it is similar in that, not to trump them, but I say that a true conspiracy is fallen angels. All these other things are just smaller conspiracies or parts of it.
Can you explain? Or
yeah.
Or are you going to plead the fifth on that one?
No. I run into a lot of people who are conspiracy theorists. And, it's like the Jekyll Island monster, what we call the Federal Reserve. There's plenty of testimony that something is going on there. But the higher, it's like playing chess. You have your pawns, then you have your higher pieces on the chessboard. And fallen angels are definitely at the top of the rank. I have no doubt that, some of them are in human form. They walk among us, and they probably are parts of some of these groups. I have no doubt about that. But from what we read, particularly in the Bible, is that the end result of this will be what we often term a new world order, which will be a one-world religion and a one-world economic system. And that's the real conspiracy. That's where things are really going toward. And there are very many other small conspiracies that try to make this happen that are part of it.
So why bother? I mean, what's the point of controlling us? If they're spiritual beings, what do they care about us and our world?
Well, it seems like, you mentioned earlier that cosmic chessboard. There seems like, my understanding, and from what I can gather, it all comes to a head, and that these giants, for instance, these hybrids, and there seems to be some indication that the military is involved with this as well. They probably are under the impression that they are aliens, where they're actually interdimensional. They're not from other galaxies. But it seems to be that at the climax of the apocalypse, that the warring factions, if you would, that will be involved in that, hybrids. There's a personage called the Antichrist and the Beast that come to the forefront and manipulate and control humanity. So it seems to be, that the war, so to speak, that accumulates in a total rebellion toward God, and which is ended by Christ returning himself physically and visibly in the clouds and putting an end to it.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a total devil's advocate question here. So why doesn't God just take them out? As many parents say to their kids, I brought you into this world, I can take you back out of it. Why doesn't God, draw the line and
Well,
do something about it as opposed to taking a back seat.
Right. I've asked myself that many times. You know, it's like Jeffrey Dahmer. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But these men that have been culpable in these vastly hideous crimes. You know, if I was God, I applied for God's assistant, but I haven't heard anything back on my application yet. You know, I'd just zap that old boy. That'd be the end of that. And I think as people, that's the way we would do things. But you know, God is. In fact, the Latins had a term which I love for it. They said "Deus absconita," and it meant literally a hidden God. They're just things about God and why He does things and why He allows things that are just not totally clear to us. My guess and my understanding of why He hasn't is that evil in men's hearts and evil in these angels as well, in the whole realm, both of the spiritual and the physical, has not totally manifested itself. And it's sort of like lining up a bunch of people and saying, okay, I'm going to try to pick out which ones are good or bad. I'm sure God knows that, but maybe it's important that the others in what we might call the congregation, in other words, the other millions or however many angels and beings there are, maybe it's important that they see in whom this evil resides. And that's the only thing that I can relate it to. In the New Testament, it talks about the end of the world, that the angels will be sent forth to divide the wheat from the tare, which sort of, I think, backs that up in saying that the tares won't totally be visible until the end of the world. Not the total physical end of the world, but we're talking about the end of the apocalypse.
Okay, I don't know that I understand what that means.
The apocalypse? The book of Revelation?
No, the tares? Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm not understanding.
Okay, it's a scripture in it's a parable in the Gospels that talks about at the end of the world, the angels will be sent forth into the earth to take the wheat and put it in the storehouse, and take the tares and bundle them up and burn them. So the analogy is that it says, let the tares and the wheat grow together into the end of time. It's sort of like a garden. If you think about a garden, you don't, when you plant the garden and the wheat comes up, eventually you're going to get bad tares that come up in the wheat. Mm-hmm. But you can't really harvest, get rid of the tares until you can go in there and see that they're all there. And then you harvest the wheat, you put it in the barn, and you burn the tares. I think that's the analogy that's used there.
Sorry, city girl. I'm like, a tare? What's that? Okay. We have a question in the chat room from Michael Park that asks, where are the giants now?
Well, I think that there are some of them on the earth now, but I think that they're coming in greater number, and I think they'll be seen. That's one of the things I'm trying to vocalize, is that we will see them. But there are reports around the world. There's an interesting picture I've got on my website, fallenangelstoday.com. If they'll search for it, they'll see a North Korean. When Kim Jong-il died, there was a parade, and the Associated Press took a picture, and in that picture showed up this North Korean that's at least twice the height of any other North Korean. And what I would say about that is that's some kind of genetic manipulation. That's something along the lines of what I'm talking about. And I think that, this gets into that conspiracy thing. I think governments of the world are implicitly involved in some of this. I don't really know to what degree, and I don't know, if there are hidden bases out in New Mexico like some people talk about and that kind of thing. So I just sort of deal with it from the larger picture than the smaller one. But they are among us, and I believe we're going to see many more of them.
All you need to do is look at professional sports, especially basketball. Whew.
Well,
you can do a whole study right there.
Yeah, those people have they're not really what we would call giants. In the Bible, giants were as tall as trees. True giants were that tall. There wasn't any question that that's what they were. Now, my opinion, and this is just a surmise, is that these angels have been working on this problem for many thousands of years, because giantism in the Bible, as we know it, they were very large. Some of them as tall as 350 or 400 feet tall. They often had some genetic markers like 6 fingers, 6 toes. And this is just my intuition, and this is an assumption here, that for thousands of years they've been working to get something a little more human-like that can pass more so for a human. So I think that, maybe when we have this alien disclosure, if you would, that happens, and I think most of the world will follow after that, I think that's when we'll see some of these creatures that may not all be 100 foot tall, but there'll be some that'll be definitely beyond what we would call basketball players in height.
Mm-hmm. So if the fallen angels gain control through their, manipulation, and it sounds like of world governments, so that we have this one world order, I guess I still am missing, what do they gain? What do they... inside I just don't see the point, and maybe the point is bigger than us to really understand.
Well, from what we understand, the devil has always had control of the world governments. In fact, he took Christ up on top of the pinnacle of the temple and showed them to him. So it's not been a matter that he hasn't controlled them, but it seems like in the book of Revelation, what we call the apocalypse, that an individual by the name of the Antichrist, which I think will be half human and half Satan, I think it'll be a Nephilim, and another character by the name of the Beast. And it's, the book of Revelation is very difficult to understand, but I think that what it's saying is that they will rally the world together under one government, one religion, and one economic system, and will virtually try to fight the return of Christ. Now, that sounds like, how do you do that? I don't think that that's successful, but I think that that is what the attempt will be. And I think that's why some of the book of Revelation or the Apocalypse is so symbolic and so difficult to understand. Why does the devil think he's going to win a fight that he knows he's already lost?
What I find interesting in that viewpoint is even what we see going on in our government today and in the world today, there is always someone who doesn't agree. Should we have Social Security? Shouldn't we have Social Security? Should we have daycare? How should you discipline your children? And even if you put a one-world government in, I don't really see the people singing Kumbaya, holding hands, going, oh, this one-world government is great. There might be some people that think it's a good idea, and will go with the system. But I think there's going to be, as we see now, and I would think historically, a group, if not large group, that are going to be naysayers to the whole thing. If not with their words, with their hearts.
Well, I think that one of the things we do have to remember is that, the stage is set in the book of Revelation by some of the terrible judgments that come upon the earth. At one time, a third of the green grass it talks about is burned up. So it looks like there'll be nuclear holocaust. It looks like plagues will be released. It's going to be a world unlike anything that we've seen. And some world leader, the Antichrist, will arise out of that. And so I think that's the part that, we can't look at it today and say, it would be impossible, because I think we'll be talking about a world that has really come down to survival. And, that's another part of what I often tell people is that we need to be prepared in a physical sense for some of these hard things that are going to come on the earth, and we need to be prepared spiritually in our hearts. We need to know Christ as our Lord, because when these things start happening on the earth, I have no doubt that some people will just die from heart attacks. It will be that fearful looking.
Mm-hmm. So you think there's going to be factors that plague civilization to make it easier for these people to kind of while their way in?
Oh, exactly.
Like somebody was posting something about the economic situation. The UK is going to fail, and, there's all the stuff going on in Greece, and, now China's getting into the middle of this whole thing, which could, affect us globally. And so you're kind of looking at it from that perspective of we're going to be in a vulnerable place, and so they'll be able to just take advantage of our vulnerability.
Exactly.
Would that be a correct thing?
You've got to collapse what you've got in order to create something new. In other words, if you're going to bring in a new monetary system, you've got to throw away the old one first.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to bring in a new religion, you've got to throw away the old ones first. It's like every time I turn on the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, anytime I read anything anymore, the ancient astronaut theory that mankind was seeded by ancient astronauts, it's just rampant. The new movie Prometheus comes out and talks about that. So I think that, when a disclosure comes out, the government says, "Oh, we've been in contact with aliens," and these aliens, of course, will come forth, these fallen angels, with technology. See, we tend to think that fallen angels are just spiritual things and, wispy things. They're not. They have technology. Some of them are in human form, and they have technology. And, if there's anything that mesmerizes government and people, it's technology. And I think that what they do is trade technology for influence. So I think when this comes out, I think the world will follow after them. And then, we're going to be in a time of, I'm sure, of nuclear holocaust across this world. Plagues, it talks about one of the four horsemen, that the beast of the earth are released. And I think personally the beast of the earth are viruses. And so I see, a time coming that plagues will devastate humanity. And, we read about that like the Arvin flu. Some of that stuff they've created in labs now, they're even talking about how you can create it. And it's 50 or 60% deadly. So,
and you can find instructions on YouTube, I'm sure. Hey, Casey, our time is up.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very interesting. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your insights with the listeners. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. And I would like to just briefly mention the book, Fallen Angels, and available on Amazon. It's even available on web now with Walmart.
Okay. Excellent.
So they can get it from Amazon or even from my website if they like.
Which would be fallenangelstoday.com, right?
That's correct. Uh-huh.
Woohoo! All right, Casey.
Thank you so much.
All right. Got to go.
All
and you have a great afternoon, great weekend, okay?
You too. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. That was CK Quarterman. His book is Fallen Angels, Giant UFO Encounters in the New World Order. His webpage is fallenangelstoday.com or fallenangels-ckquarterman.com. And next week, we're going to be speaking with Ken Hudnall. The topic is UFO, secret societies, and ancient gods. So until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita. Until next time, remember,